That night, I had prepared the dinner table, with all the care and attention I was known for. The candlelight cast a soft glow on the plates, reflecting the quiet effort I'd put into every detail. My children, Madison and Anthony, sat across from each other, exchanging furtive glances while nervously tapping their fingers on the table. At the end of the table, Nicholas, my husband, was absorbed in his phone, showing complete indifference to the scene before him. With a calm expression, I placed the last dish in the center of the table, one he had once claimed was his favorite. Finally settling into my seat, I smoothed my dress and looked toward Nicholas, waiting for some sign of appreciation. But that sign never came. Without looking up from his screen, Nicholas muttered, "Fish again?" The words shattered the silence. I heard Madison's soft sigh, and watched as Anthony stabbed his fork into his bread as if he were driving in a nail. Keeping my composure, I responded softly, "I thought you liked it." He finally looked up, but not to express gratitude. His face wore a cynical smirk that only intensified the tension in the air. "You're mistaken," he said coldly, "just like you've been about everything lately." Madison's fork clattered to her plate, the metallic sound echoing through the room. I turned to her with a gentle smile, trying to convey that everything would be all right, even as I felt the ground shifting beneath my feet. Anthony tried to intervene, starting with a "Dad," but Nicholas raised his hand and harshly cut him off. "This doesn't concern you, Anthony. This isn't your problem," Nicholas snapped. I watched my son shrink back in his chair, arms crossed. Nicholas turned his cold gaze toward me as I gripped my knife, making the simple act of cutting bread feel like an insurmountable task. "I've been tolerating this life for months now," he continued, his voice rising. "Your lack of enthusiasm, your indifference, your inability to be what I need. What kind of wife are you?" Those words struck me. While Nicholas's cruel remarks weren't new, delivering them in front of our children felt especially brutal. Taking a deep breath to maintain my composure, I lowered my eyes to my plate, my appetite long gone. "Nicholas, please, not in front of the children," I whispered. He responded with a sarcastic smile, "What about the children? They're not kids anymore. Madison is 17, Anthony is 15. They need to learn about reality. They need to understand that not everything in this house is perfect," he added coldly. Madison couldn't take it anymore. She stood up abruptly, her eyes filled with tears, and shouted, "You have no right to say these things." With that, she ran to her room, and I heard her door slam against the dining room walls. I looked at Anthony, who remained frozen in his seat, his face a mixture of confusion and loyalty. Nicholas didn't even bother to turn away as he took a sip of wine and said, "This is what happens when you raise weak children. Stop it." I raised my voice for the first time that evening. The force in my tone caught Nicholas off guard, and he set his glass down with visible surprise. He bent forward, perceiving an unexpected threat. "Enough of this. Now you're giving me orders? Maybe that's the problem, Heather. I've given you too much freedom," he sneered. "And now, it's all going to end. I've made my decision." A thick silence filled every corner of the room. I noticed Anthony's body tense, ready to spring from his chair. Nicholas ignored our son's reaction and continued deliberately, "I want a divorce." The words drifted through the air, sucking all the warmth from the room. The world spun beneath my feet, but I kept my expression unchanged. Over the years, I'd perfected the art of hiding my fragility behind a mask of composure. But inside, something was breaking. It wasn't just the pain of betrayal, it was the humiliation of being exposed like this in front of my children. Anthony couldn't contain himself any longer and stood up with clenched fists. "How can you do this?" he shouted, glaring at his father with fury in his eyes. "Sit down, Anthony," Nicholas commanded in a rusty voice of authority. "No, I won't sit. Not after hearing this. I raised my hand to calm my son, but he was already past his breaking point. Is this what you think a good father does? Making Madison cry and insulting Mom? You're a coward, he shouted. Nicholas stood up to face Anthony, but I intervened before things could spiral completely out of control. Anthony, please, go to your room, I said firmly. My son hesitated for a moment but was persuaded by the resolve in my voice, and left the dining room with heavy steps. Only the parents remained. Nicholas looked at me with a mixture of irritation and provocation in his eyes. There's no avoiding this anymore, Heather. It's over, he said coldly. I'm in love with another woman. Someone who makes me happy. I raised my face and met his gaze directly with a strength I'd never shown before. In that moment, something changed. There were no tears, no pleading. Just a heavy silence full of meaning that Nicholas couldn't decipher. I slowly stood up and began clearing the plates with deliberate care, as if performing a ritual. Each of my movements seemed to express some greater unspoken resolve. When I finished clearing the table, I looked at him one last time before leaving the dining room. I won't stop you, Nicholas. But I won't yield either, I said as I walked away. In those moments, each deliberate motion of putting away the dishes felt like a silent declaration of my strength. I knew my careful movements spoke volumes more than any words could have. As I looked at him one final time, I saw confusion flicker across his face. He had expected tears, pleading, anything but this calm resolution. My parting words hung in the air behind me, as I left him alone with the remnants of our last family dinner. The house was silent, and the laughter of children that once filled every corner no longer echoed. Those precious moments of joy had faded into distant memories, now buried beneath the crushing weight of this fateful evening. The once warm family home stood frozen in time, a testament to the devastating power of words that could never be taken back. I woke up early that morning, dark circles under my eyes telling the story of my sleepless night. In the kitchen, I moved automatically, preparing breakfast not out of habit but from a sense of responsibility. Madison and Anthony needed a proper meal before school, regardless of what had happened. Madison appeared first, dragging her feet as she sat down at the table. Her eyes were swollen from crying, and she sat in silence. I set out milk, bread, and jam for her, neither of us speaking though our silence said more than words ever could. Then Anthony appeared, his hair disheveled, barely containing his anger. Where is he? He demanded, breaking the silence. Without looking up from the eggs I was cooking, I quietly told him that his father had left early and I didn't know where he'd gone. Anthony slammed his fist on the table, making Madison jump. He spat out that of course his father had left. Running away was always easier than facing problems. Anthony. I turned to him, my voice carrying a warning rather than criticism. Please, don't make things worse, I pleaded. He started to respond but stopped, something in my expression making him think better of it. The phone's ring cut through my thoughts. I hesitated for a moment, fearing more bad news. When I answered, it wasn't Nicholas, but my friend Natalie. She asked me directly if I was okay. I am. I paused, searching for words to hide the tremor in my voice. I'm managing, I finally said. Natalie, with motherly gentleness, didn't press further but reminded me that I didn't have to carry everything alone. I thanked her softly and hung up. Though brief, that conversation reminded me I wasn't completely alone. Rising from the sofa, I began tidying the room, hoping that organizing the physical space might help sort out the chaos in my mind. By evening, Madison and Anthony came home, but the air remained heavy. Madison went straight to her room while Anthony lingered in the living room, watching me. Finally breaking the silence, he asked what we were going to do now. I put down the book I'd been pretending to read and looked at him. Right now, what matters most is making sure you both are okay, I told him. That's not an answer, Anthony frowned, showing a maturity beyond his years. He told me I shouldn't let his father treat me this way. I moved closer to him and placed my hand on his shoulder. Anthony, I know how hard this is, I said softly, but I don't want you to be consumed by hatred. What he did is his responsibility, not yours. Anthony didn't respond. His eyes were fixed on the floor, as if searching for answers in the carpet patterns. Finally, he sighed and went upstairs, leaving me alone once again. At 10 p.m., while the house was wrapped in silence, Nicholas came home. I was sitting at the dining table writing in my notebook when I heard the door close. I looked up to see him enter with his tie loosened, radiating an arrogance that seemed untouched by the tension he had created. "Still up?" he asked, his tone almost mocking. "Someone needs to be," I replied without looking at him. Nicholas poured himself a glass of water and sat down across from me. For a while, neither of us spoke. I continued writing while he watched me, seemingly waiting for something. Nothing to say, he finally broke the silence. I looked up at him briefly, my face showing neither tears nor pleading, just a calmness he couldn't comprehend. "What would you like me to say?" I asked. "You said everything last night, didn't you?" He responded in the tone of a teacher explaining something to a stubborn student, saying he wanted me to understand this was best for everyone. I put my pencil down and looked directly at him. "What I understand is that our children deserve better than this," I said firmly. "And I won't let you hurt them anymore." He opened his mouth to respond but found no words. There was something about me that confused him, a quiet strength he hadn't expected. Without another word, he stood up and went upstairs. I remained alone at the table. At midnight, I turned off the lights and headed to my room. As I entered, before closing my eyes, I realized something: this battle was just beginning. But something inside me was beginning to change. What I felt now wasn't fear anymore, but a strange clarity. It was a feeling that allowed me to see things from a different perspective. I wasn't alone, and I certainly wasn't defeated. Morning arrived with overcast skies, as if reflecting the heavy atmosphere that hung over our house. I walked through the living room with my coffee, watching the steam slowly disappear into the cold air. My thoughts wandered between memories and questions I'd never dared to voice before. Last night had made one thing crystal clear: there was no going back. As I looked at the photos on the shelf, my mind drifted to a different time, to a different Nicholas. He seemed trapped in those gentler memories of the past. I remembered the night we first met at a party my friends had insisted I absolutely had to attend. Nicholas's smile was captivating then, charming everyone around him. That night, he made me feel special, as if we were the only two people in the room. Those memories now collided with the recent version of him, the one who barely spoke to me except to criticize. When did it all begin to change? Perhaps it was when Anthony was born, and I decided to leave my job to care for our children. We argued about it at first. Nicholas couldn't understand why I would give up the career I'd worked so hard to build. I made that decision thinking it was best for our family. But as time went on, he turned that decision into a weapon. "Everything you have is because of me," he had said during an argument about money one day, words that left a scar on my heart. I sat on the sofa, holding the photo, letting the memories wash over me. There were beautiful moments too. Afternoons in the park, playing with Madison and Anthony, Nicholas joining in, all of us laughing together. But even those happy days began to crumble with time. His attention turned first to work, then to outings with friends I didn't know. Looking back at these memories, I realized how long I'd been turning a blind eye. I had always been the one maintaining the stability of our relationship. Nicholas hadn't changed overnight, he'd simply stopped pretending. Footsteps pulled me from my thoughts. Anthony came down the stairs with messy hair and his backpack slung over his shoulder. He stared at me intently and asked if I was okay as he put his backpack down. I managed a weak smile and put the photo back on the shelf. Just remembering, I told him softly. About Dad, his tone told me he already knew the answer. I nodded and carried my empty cup to the kitchen. Anthony leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, and asked if it had always been this way. I turned to look at him and told him no, things were different before. Then what happened? He pressed. I didn't know how to answer that question. How could I explain to my son that relationships aren't always what they appear on the surface? I wiped my hands on a dish towel and sighed. People change, I said softly, and sometimes they don't change in the same direction. Anthony frowned but didn't push further. He seemed to understand I was grappling with something beyond a simple explanation. After a moment of silence, he told me that both he and Madison were on my side, no matter what. I felt something catch in my throat but hid it behind a smile. I gently stroked his hair before he grabbed his backpack and left. Once alone, I decided to tackle the attic, a task I'd been putting off for years. Something told me it was time to face what had accumulated up there. I climbed the dusty stairs and opened the attic door, which creaked softly. The space was filled with old boxes and furniture. Opening one of the nearby boxes, I found a bundle of letters Nicholas had written during our courtship. Reading them filled me with a mixture of nostalgia and sadness. The words were sweet, full of promises that would never be kept. "We'll always be a team," one letter read. I could almost hear his voice as I read those words. Beneath the letters was an album of photos from our early marriage. They showed a happy couple smiling confidently at their future. I turned the pages slowly, pausing at each photo as if searching for answers there. But the answers weren't in the photos, they were in what wasn't captured, the lonely nights and quiet arguments. At the bottom of the box was the dress I'd worn on our first wedding anniversary. I held it, remembering how beautiful, cherished, and full of hope I'd felt that night. Now that dress seemed to belong to a different life, to a different Heather. The doorbell interrupted my thoughts. I hurried downstairs and opened the door to find Natalie standing there with fresh bread. She walked right in and made herself comfortable in the living room. "Brought something to go with your coffee," she said with a smile. I brewed 2 cups of coffee and sat across from her. Natalie studied me, with a mixture of concern and curiosity. "What's on your mind?" she finally asked. "The past. How we got here," I replied. She took a sip of coffee before telling me that sometimes things just don't have explanations, but that doesn't mean I need to carry all the responsibility. I nodded, though I couldn't fully agree. I had made too many decisions trying to protect my family. I had compromised too many times to avoid conflict. Only now did I realize those compromises had given Nicholas permission to take me for granted. The afternoon passed with conversation and occasional laughter, a needed respite from the tension. After Natalie left, I felt lighter somehow. Talking had helped clear away some of the clouds that had been hanging over me. Before bed, I went back up to the attic and put away the dress and letters. I wasn't ready to throw them out, but I didn't want them where I could see them either. That night, as I got into bed, I understood something: echoes of the past don't fade easily. But I wouldn't let them dictate my future. For the first time in a long while, I felt I had something worth protecting, myself and my children. That was all that mattered now. The next morning, a heavy atmosphere hung over the house. It was as if some invisible force was filling the space with tension. I was making breakfast in the kitchen when I heard the door close. Nicholas had left early, as usual, without a word. Madison and Anthony were still sleeping, using the weekend to recover from an exhausting week. As I set up the coffee maker, I allowed myself a moment of reflection. Though I maintained a calm facade for the children, each day was a reminder that things weren't likely to improve. The distance between Madison and Nicholas was more apparent than ever. The phone's ring interrupted my thoughts. After a moment's hesitation, I answered. It was Nicole, a close family friend. "Heather, we need to talk," she said. "It's very important." Something in her tone put me on alert. Nicole rarely sounded this serious. We agreed to meet at a nearby cafe that afternoon. As I hung up, I wondered what could be so urgent. Hours later, I sat across from Nicole at the cafe. She was clearly nervous, fidgeting with her spoon. I watched her curiously, though anxiety was building in my own chest. "What is it?" I finally asked. Nicole sighed, setting down her spoon. "I've been debating whether to tell you, but I think you have a right to know." I felt tension grip my chest. "Tell me." "It's about Nicholas," she said carefully. "I've seen him with a woman several times. This isn't something new." I sat in silence, trying to process this. I'd suspected he might be seeing someone, but hearing it confirmed by someone else made it more real, deepening the pain. "Who is she?" I asked, surprised by the steadiness in my own voice. "Her name is Ella. She works with him. They've been involved for over a year." The name echoed emptily in my head. I didn't know Ella, but that wasn't what mattered. What hurt was the betrayal, the systematic betrayal hidden behind his indifference and criticism. Nicole continued talking, but I barely heard her. My mind was filled with memories and questions. All those times he'd left saying he had important meetings, had he been with her? How long had I been fooling myself, trying to save a relationship that was beyond saving? When I got home, the house was quiet. Madison was playing music in her room, and Anthony was out with friends. I climbed the stairs and stopped in front of our bedroom door. After a moment's hesitation, I turned the knob. The room was perfectly organized as always. Nicholas had always been meticulous with his things, but now that perfection seemed empty, soulless. I opened the closet, not really searching for anything specific, but feeling the need to face the truth. Between his neatly hung shirts and lined-up shoes, I found a small drawer. I'd always avoided opening it. Carefully pulling it out, I found an envelope full of papers. There were receipts, hotel reservations, printed emails, undeniable evidence of his betrayal. Just then, I heard the front door open and jumped in surprise. I quickly replaced the papers and closed the closet. Trying to maintain composure, I walked downstairs to find Nicholas entering with his usual indifferent expression. "How was your day?" he asked casually, as if nothing was wrong. I looked at him for a moment, carefully choosing my words. "Fine. And yours?" He seemed surprised by my question, but answered with indifference, "Same as usual." I said nothing more and headed to the kitchen. I wanted the silence to fill the space between us. While washing dishes, I considered how to confront him. I didn't want to create a scene in front of the children, but I couldn't stay silent anymore. That evening, after dinner, I asked Madison and Anthony to go to their rooms. Once alone, I sat across from Nicholas at the dining table. "We need to talk," I said. He looked up from his smartphone, irritated. "What is it now?" "About Ella." The name hit him like a slap. His expression changed instantly as he put his phone down. "I don't know what you're talking about." I watched him calmly, my steady gaze clearly unsettling him. You don't need to deny it. I know everything. Nicholas leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms, trying to regain control. So? What do you expect? An apology. I don't expect anything from you. I just want you to be honest for once. He gave a bitter smile. Honest? After years of this house being my burden, you talk about honesty? I felt anger rising inside me but refused to let it take control. This isn't about what you've carried. It's about the choices you've made for our family. Nicholas shook his head, trying to justify himself. Ella gives me what you never could: understanding, support, interest. Support? I repeated the word, feeling something break inside me. What do you think I've been doing all these years? He didn't answer. For a moment, silence filled the room. As I looked at him, I realized something. Whatever Nicholas might say now didn't matter anymore. He had already chosen his path, one that didn't include me or our children. This isn't just about you and me, Nicholas. The children are watching everything. What do you think they'll feel when they see who you really are? He tried to object, but I wouldn't let him. I stood up from the table and headed toward the door. If this is what you want, so be it. But I won't let you drag us down with you. Nicholas remained seated, watching me leave. For the first time, I could sense his grip on control beginning to crumble. As I climbed the stairs, I knew this was just the beginning of something much bigger. Dawn light filtered through the curtains, but I couldn't sleep. I lay awake for hours, staring at the ceiling, replaying every word Nicholas had said the night before. His confession, his callousness, his cold justification of betrayal, they echoed endlessly in my mind. I was the first one up in the house. With the weight of my growing resolve, I went to the kitchen and poured myself a cup of coffee. On the table was my notebook filled with household plans, shopping lists, and reminders. But that day, I started writing something different. I drew a line down the center of the page, creating 2 columns. On the left, I listed what I'd lost over the years: time, peace, trust, self-respect. On the right, what I still had: my children, my intelligence, my abilities, and something new that was beginning to stir, unnamed but growing stronger. Madison's footsteps pulled me from my thoughts. She appeared in the doorway, hair tousled and sleepy-eyed. "Mom, are you okay?" she asked as she sat down at the table. I nodded, closed my notebook, and smiled gently. "I'm fine, Madison. Just thinking." She didn't seem convinced but didn't push further, getting up to fix herself some cereal. "Dad left early again," she said without looking at me. Her words sent a sharp pain through my chest, but I kept my expression neutral. "How do you feel about all this?" Madison put her spoon down and looked at me. "I don't know. I'm angry but sad too. I can't understand why he'd do this." I moved closer and gently took her hand. "What's happening isn't your fault, or Anthony's. And no matter what, I'll always be here for you both." Madison nodded, though uncertainty still lingered in her eyes. After a moment of silence, she got up to prepare for her day. As I watched her head to her room, I felt something solidify inside me. Later, after Anthony left for school and Madison went out with friends, I put on simple clothes, gathered the necessary documents, and left the house. I headed to the lawyer's office Natalie had recommended. It was a modest place, with certificates and credentials on the walls that inspired confidence. The lawyer's name was Stephen, a middle-aged man who greeted me with professional courtesy. He listened to my story and began explaining the steps I needed to take to legally protect myself. "The most important thing is to be clear about what you want for yourself and your children," he said in a calm voice. "We can secure what you need to move forward, but it will take time and effort. I listened carefully to his words, taking notes and letting each one sink in. Every word he spoke seemed to illuminate a path I hadn't considered before. It wouldn't be easy, but for the first time, I saw a glimmer of hope. Several weeks passed, and I began to see the direction I needed to take. When I returned home, I stopped at the entrance, catching my reflection in the window. There was a spark in my expression that I hadn't seen in a long time. I entered the house with an odd sense of relief and went upstairs to put away the documents. When Madison and Anthony came home, I gathered them in the living room. They sat on the sofa, watching me with curiosity and slight apprehension. "I need to talk to you both," I began. Madison crossed her arms and Anthony frowned. They both looked prepared for bad news. "I understand how difficult this has been for you. And I understand how you're feeling. While we can't change what your father did, I can make sure you're both safe." Anthony tilted his head, considering my words. "What are you going to do?" he asked firmly. "I'm taking steps to protect us," I told them, looking directly into their eyes. "There might be changes, but I promise we'll get through this together." Madison looked at me with tears in her eyes. "Will we stay here?" I took a steady breath and answered. "For now, yes. This is our home. I won't let anyone take that from us." Anthony stood up and wordlessly embraced me. Madison joined in, and for a moment, the three of us were bound together in silence by something stronger than pain, hope. That night, when Nicholas came home with his usual indifference, I watched him calmly. I said nothing about my meeting with the lawyer or my talk with the children. I knew the time would come to confront him, but it wasn't today. After dinner, I returned to my room and opened my notebook again. This time, I added a new word to the things I still have column, clarity. It was just the beginning, but I felt ready to take the next step. That night, as the rest of the house slept, I finally allowed myself to rest. Not everything was resolved, but for the first time in a long while, I felt I could move forward. That day, the tension in our house was palpable. Nicholas had insisted on inviting Ella, coldly justifying his decision. For him, it was simply a logical step in normalizing his new life, showing no concern for how it might affect others. I accepted it quietly, knowing this was our chance to face what we both knew but hadn't acknowledged. I had arranged the living room, as usual, maintaining its familiar calm. Madison and Anthony sat on the sofa, their faces a mixture of discomfort and curiosity. Nicholas arrived first, followed by Ella. She was young and polished, carrying herself with a confidence that seemed out of place in this situation. "Thank you for having me," Ella smiled at everyone as she sat next to Nicholas. I avoided looking directly at her, focusing instead on pouring coffee. Each movement I made was deliberate and careful, contrasting with the tension filling the room. Nicholas looked satisfied with his choice, wearing the expression of someone who believed they'd won something. "I'm glad everyone's here," he began casually, breaking the silence. "I think we need to make some things clear." Madison frowned and looked at me, searching for a reaction. I gave her a calm look, silently asking her to stay composed. But Anthony couldn't contain himself. "Make things clear?" He echoed in disbelief, his words reverberating through the room. "Are you serious, Dad?" Nicholas sighed, treating him like a stubborn child. "Yes, Anthony. It's time to accept reality. Ella and I are together. That's not going to change." The silence that followed was suffocating. I finally sat at the table, folding my hands in front of me. Ella tried to maintain her smile, but the tension was clearly affecting her. "So what do you want from us?" Madison asked, her voice trembling slightly. "Our blessings?" Nicholas started to speak, but I cut him off with a calm yet firm tone. This isn't a meeting to impose anything. It's an opportunity for everyone to express their thoughts. Nicholas stared at me in surprise, clearly not expecting this response, taken aback by my composure. "By all means," he said with a dramatic gesture. I stood up and walked to the window, gazing outside for a moment before turning to face everyone. "I think it's time to be clear about things," I said firmly. "Not just for ourselves, but especially for Madison and Anthony. They have a right to know who you really are." Nicholas tensed visibly but remained silent. Ella lowered her eyes uncomfortably, clearly confused by the direction this was taking. I continued, my voice carrying not anger but a clarity that no one had expected. "For years, I've worked to keep this family together. I've tried to solve problems, supported you even when I needed support myself. But you found no value in that and chose something else." When Nicholas tried to interrupt, I raised my hand to stop him. "I'm not finished. I don't care how you live your life, but I won't let you drag our children into your charade." Madison stared at me in surprise, while Anthony smiled slightly, watching proudly as I stood up to Nicholas. Ella, who had been silent until now, finally spoke. "I didn't mean to cause problems. I just thought this would make things easier for everyone." I looked directly at her for the first time. My expression held no hatred, only a mixture of pity and determination. "Easier?" I asked. "Surely you understand this isn't easy for anyone. And if you think you can step into our lives without consequences, you're mistaken." Ella fell silent. Nicholas stood up, irritated. "This isn't going to work." "No, it's not," I agreed, looking straight at him. "Because you're no longer in control of this narrative. It's our turn to make decisions now." The tension in the room was almost tangible. Nicholas looked at the children, seeking some support, but found only disappointment in their faces. Finally, he sighed in resignation and said, "This was a mistake. Come on, Ella." He stood and headed for the door. Ella followed, avoiding my gaze as she left. When the door closed, silence filled the living room once again. Madison and Anthony watched me, waiting for my reaction. I sank into the sofa, closed my eyes for a moment, then began to speak. That wasn't easy, but it was necessary. Anthony came closer and hugged me gently. Madison took my hand. "We're on your side, Mom," Madison said softly. That night, after everyone had gone to their rooms, I sat alone in the living room, watching the candlelight shadows dance on the wall. I didn't feel secure, but there was a strange peace within me. There was still so much to do, but this time I knew I wasn't alone. Our broken family had somehow grown stronger through the cracks. For me, that was enough. After that, the tension in the house reached its peak, and Nicholas didn't come home for several days following our confrontation. The house felt both emptier and more relieved during his absence. I used this time to move forward with the legal proceedings. I spent hours reviewing documents and consulting with my lawyer, making sure every detail was in order. Each step reminded me painfully of my marriage's collapse, but I knew this was the necessary path. One afternoon, as I was finishing reviewing some papers, the front door burst open. Nicholas stormed in, radiating angry energy. From the dining room, I watched him roughly throw his keys on the table. "We need to talk," he said without preamble. I closed the file in front of me, and stood up. My expression was calm, though my hands trembled slightly. "Go ahead," I said. Nicholas paced wildly through the house, arms crossed. "What are you doing? Why are you acting like this is all my fault?" I looked at him silently for a moment before answering quietly. "I'm not acting. Your decisions are affecting all of us now." "This isn't fair," he shouted, slamming his fist on the table. I'm just trying to be happy, but you're making me out to be the villain. I stepped forward, keeping my voice steady. This isn't about assigning blame, Nicholas. The issue is that you chose to hurt this family, and don't want to accept responsibility for it. He shook his head with a cynical laugh. You always were good with words. But tell me, Heather, what did you do to save this marriage? His words hit me harder than I expected. For years, I had sacrificed myself to maintain our relationship. I had endured humiliation, ignored warning signs, and kept hoping things would get better. Now, hearing such accusations from Nicholas confirmed that he was completely blind to his own actions. I did everything I could, I replied quietly, hiding my pain. But I won't keep carrying the weight of what you've broken. For a moment, Nicholas seemed at a loss for words, though the anger never left his eyes. He collapsed into a chair, running his hands through his hair. This didn't have to happen, he said. I watched him, feeling a mixture of sadness and relief. For years, I had hoped for some recognition or apology from him, but I now realized it would never come. Nicholas could only see his own desires, and I was done fighting that battle. Just then, Madison and Anthony came home. They stopped in their tracks at the scene before them. Anthony frowned, dropping his backpack to the floor. What's going on? He asked. Nothing you don't already know, I said, trying to calm them with my eyes. Your father and I were just talking. Nicholas suddenly stood up, looking at our son with defiance. Do you have something to say? Anthony met his father's gaze without flinching. Yeah. I can't believe you're still acting like none of this is your fault. Nicholas stiffened but said nothing. Madison, who had been silent, came to stand beside me, and took my hand. Mom, you don't need to listen to this anymore. I felt emotions welling up at my daughter's words. I wasn't alone, my children understood and were standing with me. Taking a deep breath, I turned to Nicholas. Please leave, Nicholas. He looked at me in disbelief. You're throwing me out of my own house. I'm asking you to respect that this is also our children's home. He seemed about to argue but instead grabbed his keys and headed for the door. Before opening it, he turned back to look at me. This isn't over, Heather. I watched him leave without a word. As the door closed, I felt as if a heavy weight had been lifted from my shoulders. Madison and Anthony moved closer, embracing me tightly. That evening, I sat in the living room with a warm cup of tea. The house was quiet, but it was a different kind of quiet than before. This silence wasn't uncomfortable, it was peaceful, a time for reflection. I smiled slightly. Even though the road ahead would be difficult, I knew I had crossed a threshold. There was no going back now. That realization brought me a feeling I hadn't experienced in a long time, strength. The morning was cold and cloudy. It was as if it were my state of mind. As I arranged the dining room table, I had asked Nicholas to come back that afternoon. He'd agreed reluctantly, his words and attitude clearly showing his displeasure. He still believed he was in control of the situation. He thought my actions couldn't possibly change the narrative he'd constructed. Madison and Anthony were in their rooms, respecting the time I'd asked for. They understood this conversation would be decisive, though they weren't sure exactly what I planned to achieve. Still, they trusted me. The weight of uncertainty hung heavy between the three of us. At exactly 4 p.m., the front door announced Nicholas's arrival. He strode in with an air of authority. His suit was immaculate, seemingly tailored to intimidate. His expression was serious, but his eyes held a trace of arrogance. Without being invited, he took the head seat at the table. What is this about? He asked impatiently. I placed a file on the table and sat across from him. My face was calm, my movements deliberate. Nicholas watched me with curiosity, though a hint of mockery played in his eyes. "We're going to discuss how we move forward," I began, opening the file and taking out a series of documents. "This isn't just a conversation. I've taken action." He picked up the papers slowly, processing the information piece by piece. His expression shifted from confusion to disbelief, and finally to anger. "You're trying to throw me out of my house," he raised his voice. "I'm not trying to do anything," I replied, keeping my tone steady. "What's in these documents is the result of your own decisions. This house will remain the children's home." "This is ridiculous," he slammed the papers down on the table. "You have no right to do this." "I do have that right," I met his gaze directly. "I've consulted a lawyer. Everything in these documents is legally sound." Nicholas leaned back in his chair and crossed his arms. His eyes held a mixture of irritation and contempt. "What are you trying to achieve here? To humiliate me?" "This isn't about you," I replied calmly. "This is about protecting our family from any more hurt. Madison and Anthony have seen enough." Nicholas seemed lost for words, appearing to think carefully. I could tell he was searching for words that would help him regain the upper hand. "You think you'll win with this? That's never going to happen." I didn't answer immediately, instead walking to the window. Looking out at the yard, I remembered the times when the children used to play there. Then I turned back to face him. "I'm not trying to win anything. I just want peace for myself and our children." At that moment, the door to the back room opened and Anthony appeared. Madison followed, and they both approached the table as if they understood everything. Their faces showed clear support for me and defiance toward their father. "We're on Mom's side," Anthony said firmly. "We support her decisions." Madison nodded, taking my hand. "We don't want any more fighting." Nicholas stared at the children with a look of confusion I hadn't seen from him in a long time. There was a hint of regret in his eyes. But the silence didn't last long. "This is ridiculous," he finally shouted, leaving the table. "I won't let you make me the villain." "We're not making you anything," I said, keeping my voice calm. "We're just not letting you impose your terms anymore." Nicholas stood there, looking at the three of us. He saw me, composed yet determined, Anthony with his clenched fists, and Madison with her resolute eyes. For him, it was the moment he lost control. Without another word, Nicholas grabbed the papers from the table and left. The door slammed shut, its echo lingering in the living room. But this time, it didn't leave us with the usual emptiness. I sank into my chair with a long sigh. Madison and Anthony sat beside me, and for the first time in a while, we shared a peaceful moment together. It wasn't a celebration, but there was no fear either. That night, as I was reviewing documents in my room, I received a message from Natalie. It was a simple sentence, but it carried deep meaning. "You're achieving what you once thought impossible." I smiled. Though I knew there was still much to resolve, I had taken an important step that day. And as I turned off the lights to sleep, I experienced a feeling I hadn't known in years: freedom. The weeks following Nicholas's departure were filled with change and adjustment. Our once tense and heavy home gradually began to feel lighter. Together, Madison, Anthony, and I rebuilt our family bonds while adapting to our new normal. Nicholas's absence no longer felt like pain, it had become an opportunity for a new beginning. Every morning, I woke up feeling new energy. It wasn't always easy. Some days, nostalgia would hit unexpectedly, or memories would surface without warning. But now I had a clear purpose: to move forward. I decided to pursue an old dream I'd forgotten during my marriage: my passion for baking. Before getting married, I'd sold cakes to friends and neighbors, and it had made me feel so alive. I'd given it up for the family, but now, with Madison and Anthony's support, I decided to start a small business from home. One afternoon, Madison came into the kitchen to find me surrounded by recipe books, cake pans, and bags of flour. When she curiously asked what I was doing, I looked up and smiled. "I'm going to start baking cakes again. I'm hoping to turn it into something bigger." Madison immediately got excited, offering to help with label designs and social media promotion. Anthony, who'd overheard from the living room, joined in, volunteering to handle deliveries. I looked at them both with gratitude. This project wasn't just for me, it was bringing our family together, giving us all a positive goal to focus on. We started making detailed plans as a family. Madison created a simple, elegant logo while Anthony compiled a list of potential customers. The first week was challenging. I spent long hours in the kitchen, testing recipes and perfecting flavors. Orders were slow at first, but gradually, through word of mouth, neighbors, friends, and acquaintances started placing orders. One Saturday morning, Natalie arrived with a box of fresh fruit. "I hear you're becoming famous in the neighborhood," she said with a smile. I laughed while cleaning up a tray of cupcakes. "It's just the beginning, but I'm happy." Natalie stayed for a while, helping out and talking about how the business had brought new energy to our home. That evening, Madison appeared with her phone to show me a message from a local patisserie. "Look, Mom. They want to collaborate with us." "See, Mom? This is really happening." Later that night, after everyone had gone to bed, I sat alone in the kitchen, looking at the used baking tools. My heart was filled with gratitude. Not only was I doing something I loved again, but I could see my children were happier, and our family had grown closer. We had built something together that was uniquely ours. But not everything was perfect. One afternoon, while I was delivering orders, I got a call from Nicholas. His voice was different now, less arrogant, somehow subdued. "We need to talk," he said, making my stomach tighten. I agreed to meet him the next day at a nearby cafe. Nicholas looked tired. The weeks away from home had clearly affected him more than I'd expected. "I don't want to fight," he said, fidgeting with his coffee cup. "I just wanted to know how the kids are doing." "They're fine," I replied briefly. "We're finding our own rhythm." Nicholas nodded, looking away for a moment. I watched him quietly, remembering the man I had once loved. I no longer felt hatred or resentment, just a sense that everything was over. "I hope you find what you're looking for, Nicholas," I said. He looked at me with surprise, but didn't respond. As we parted ways, I felt a strange peace. The conversation confirmed that I no longer needed him for my happiness. Over the months, my business grew. A local cafe started selling my cakes, and soon I was being invited to local events. Madison and Anthony were essential to my success, helping me every step of the way. One afternoon, while preparing a large order, Anthony looked at me and said he was proud of me. I stopped what I was doing, surprised. "Thank you, Anthony. That means so much to me." Madison, while decorating a cake, added that she was proud too, that what I was doing was amazing. I hugged them both, realizing in that moment that my efforts had improved not just our business, but our relationship as a family. We had overcome so many challenges, but now our bonds were stronger than ever. That afternoon, the neighborhood streets were filled with anticipation and excitement. Tables lined with homemade food and crafts were decorated by local residents. I had agreed to set up a stall with my specialty cakes. Madison and Anthony helped me carefully arrange the sweets and set up our small business sign. The lively atmosphere, children's laughter, adults chatting, live music, made me forget all those dark days I'd experienced. I felt grateful to be there, greeting customers and offering cake samples. Natalie arrived a bit late with a big smile and a box of coffee. "Looks like your stall is the most popular," she joked, pointing to the line. "That's thanks to my assistants," I replied, gesturing to Madison and Anthony, who were working enthusiastically. During the event, the organizer approached me with a request. "We're having a session at the end where participants share their experiences. Would you be willing to speak?" I was surprised by the offer. I hadn't planned to speak publicly, but something in her earnest expression moved me to nod. I thought this moment might be an opportunity to express what I'd learned. When the time came, I was handed a microphone as the crowd gathered around the stage. The murmur of voices gradually quieted as I walked onto the stage with steady steps. Madison and Anthony were in the audience, watching me with a mixture of pride and anticipation. "Hello, everyone," I began with a warm smile. "First, I want to thank this wonderful community. Places like this allow us to share our stories and support each other." I paused, looking around quietly. It wasn't easy to put all my feelings into words. But I knew speaking from my heart was the only thing I could do. A few months ago, my life changed in ways I never imagined. I went through a difficult time when everything I built seemed to be crumbling. But in that storm, I found something I'd completely forgotten: the strength to make a new start. I could see tears in Madison's eyes as she fought to hold them back while listening. Anthony stood with his arms crossed, nodding slowly as if deeply understanding my words. "It wasn't easy," I continued, looking at the audience. "There were days when I doubted myself. Days when fear felt bigger than hope. But I learned something: I wasn't alone. I had my children, my friends, and myself. That was enough to keep moving forward." I could hear murmurs of agreement from the crowd, with some nodding and others looking at me with admiration. I felt an unexpected calm as I sensed my words reaching their hearts. Today, being here with all of you, seeing my family united, I've realized something very important. No matter how much we lose along the way, we can always find something new. Something that makes us feel alive again. The applause that followed was warm and heartfelt. I smiled as I stepped down from the stage, feeling I'd taken another step toward the future. Madison and Anthony immediately embraced me, while Natalie handed me a warm coffee, praising my courage. "That was amazing, Mom," Madison said, her eyes still glistening with tears. "You won't find that in any book, Mom," Anthony added, patting my back gently. The quiet in the car on the way home wasn't awkward, it was a peaceful silence. It reflected our journey so far and the future ahead. At home, I sat in the living room, watching Madison and Anthony laugh together as they sorted through the day's earnings. I closed my eyes and remembered everything we'd been through. The tears, the fights, the moments I thought I couldn't go on. But among those memories were also moments of growth, love, and strength. In my room, my desk held business reports and notes full of new ideas. Next to them was an old photo of the children on a sunny day in the park. I looked at it for a moment, before gently putting it away in a drawer. I no longer needed to be bound by the past. I had the present, and that was enough. Before sleep, I checked my phone and found a brief message from Nicholas. It was reserved, almost awkward: "Glad to see you're doing well." I read it quietly and didn't respond. I didn't need to. My emotions were no longer tied to him or his approval. I had found something more important: myself. That night, I dreamed of running through a wide field filled with light and fresh air. In the dream, I felt no burdens, only freedom. When I woke, I realized it wasn't just a dream. It was my reality. I had been reborn. Not as who I was, but as someone new. Someone with the strength to face whatever challenges might come.